Moonlight spilled across the desert like liquid silver, turning the endless dunes into rolling waves of pale fire. From the east came the low groan of wagon wheels, a slow rhythm that mingled with the hiss of wind through brittle mesquite. Lanterns swung from high arches of canvas and wood, their glow painting soft halos in the darkness as the midnight circus crept toward the sleeping town of Red Mesa. Horses snorted and stamped, their breath rising in ghostly plumes. Every creak of leather, every muted jangle of harness bells, seemed to promise something more than mere entertainment. Red Mesa lay quiet beneath the sharp stars. A few lamps still burned behind shuttered windows, their faint light trembling across adobe walls and weathered porches. The town had known traveling shows before, but never one that arrived at midnight. Dogs barked and then fell silent as the procession entered the main street. Curtains twitched. Children whispered behind doors. The smell of sawdust and oiled rope drifted on the cool desert air, a scent both foreign and strangely inviting. At the head of the line rode a tall figure wrapped in a black riding coat, the brim of her hat pulled low. Eleanor Kane, Ellie to those who dared familiarity, held the reins with a calm steadiness, her posture as straight as the rifle once slung across her back. The years had etched fine lines around her gray eyes, but nothing softened their clarity. To the townsfolk watching from the shadows, she was merely the ringmaster, a woman commanding a curious parade. Yet a few felt an unspoken current, as though she carried the weight of past battles behind her measured gaze. The wagons rolled to a halt in the dusty square. Performers leapt lightly to the ground, a fire-eater with hair like copper wire, a pair of acrobatic brothers whose bare feet made no sound, a tamer coaxing a pair of sleek black horses. They moved with quiet precision, erecting canvas walls and hammering stakes as though rehearsing some ancient ritual. The lantern light glowed brighter now, catching the red sandstone cliffs that rose beyond the town like silent sentinels. A hush settled over Red Mesa, the kind of hush that makes a heartbeat sound loud. Ellie dismounted without a word. Her boots touched the ground as lightly as falling dust. She scanned the circle of darkened doorways, the faint faces peering out, and offered a small nod that was neither greeting nor challenge. Children clutched their mother's skirts. A lone prospector standing by the saloon raised 2 fingers to his hat, then thought better of it. Something about the woman's presence invited respect without demanding it. The sheriff arrived from the south end of town, his badge glinting like a sliver of moonlight. Sheriff Alden was a broadman with a weathered face and a voice that usually carried across the street. Tonight it came low and careful. "Evening, ma'am," he said, removing his hat. "You plan to set up a show this late?" Ellie met his eyes. "The desert doesn't keep time, Sheriff. Midnight is when the stars are brightest. Stars won't help if trouble comes." He glanced toward the dark hills beyond the last cluster of buildings. "The Claiborne gang's been spotted on the old freight road. Mean lot. They like easy targets." The name rolled through the air like distant thunder. Behind Ellie, one of the acrobats paused with a mallet mid-swing. The fire-eater stilled his hands. For a moment, even the horses ceased their restless stamping. Ellie's expression did not change. "I've heard of them," she said softly. "They're close," Alden insisted. "Too close for comfort. I'd advise you to keep your wagons moving come dawn, before they get bold ideas." Her gaze shifted toward the shadowed cliffs. The faintest flicker of something, memory, perhaps, passed through her eyes. "Thank you for the warning." The sheriff waited, as if expecting more. But Ellie turned back to her crew. "Finish the circle," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority. "Lanterns at every corner. Keep the center clear." The performers obeyed instantly, their movements smooth and swift. Alden frowned. "You mean to stay?" "We mean to entertain," Ellie replied. "And to keep watch." The sheriff hesitated. There was something in her tone that left no room for argument, something that reminded him of soldiers he'd once known, people who'd walked through fire and come out the other side made of steel. He nodded, though unease lingered in his eyes. "All right, ma'am. I'll have a deputy nearby, just in case." As he walked back toward the station, Ellie watched him go, her face unreadable. Then she stepped into the half-built ring where lanterns burned with a steady gold flame. She moved among her troop, offering brief instructions. Ropes tightened here, stakes reinforced there. To an untrained eye it looked like routine preparation. Yet every adjustment turned the circus grounds into a subtle fortress, ropes strung at precise angles, barrels shifted to provide cover, lanterns placed to blind anyone approaching from the dark. When all was set, Ellie stood at the center of the circle and tilted her head to the stars. The desert night wrapped around her like a cloak. She remembered another night years ago, the crack of rifles in the canyon, the smell of black powder, the moment when a single, perfect shot had saved her husband's life. Or should have. The memory of his fall still lived in her bones, as sharp as the bullet that had taken him. She closed her eyes, breathing in the dry air until the ache became focus. Beyond the tents, Red Mesa stirred uneasily. Miners in the saloon whispered of bandits and traveling shows, wondering which posed the greater danger. Children begged their parents to let them see the circus, their voices hushed but excited. Above it all, the moon climbed higher, a pale guardian against the black sky. Ellie moved to the edge of the ring, where the fire eater waited with his unlit torches. "Keep the flames low tonight," she murmured. "We need more shadow than spectacle." He gave a single nod, sensing the unspoken meaning. Around them, the crew worked with silent purpose, each member aware that their leader's calm masked a readiness for something far more than performance. From the distant hills came a faint metallic echo, hoofs striking stone, a rhythm almost lost to the desert wind. Ellie heard it, though none of the others seemed to notice. Her hand drifted to the side of her coat, where a slender rifle barrel rested against the wagon wall. She did not reach for it. Not yet. Instead, she lifted a lantern, its flame steady despite the breeze, and set it on a tall post at the center of the ring. Light spilled across the canvas walls, turning them into shimmering curtains of gold. The midnight circus glowed like a beacon in the emptiness, a promise of wonder to the townsfolk, and a silent challenge to whatever prowled the dark. The sound of distant hooves faded, or perhaps only sank beneath the pulse of the desert. Ellie stayed still, watching the horizon until the stars blurred at the edges of her vision. Somewhere out there, danger waited. But so did she. Under a cobalt sky thick with stars, the midnight circus bloomed like a sudden dream. Lanterns flared to life, their warm glow painting the sand in ripples of gold and amber. Drums rumbled from the central ring, a heartbeat that called the town from its quiet homes. Soon a crowd gathered, boots scuffing the dust, children tugging at their parents' sleeves, faces washed in flickering light. The air carried the sweet scent of roasted almonds and fresh sawdust, mingled with the tang of desert sage cooling in the night. A tightrope walker stepped onto a silver cord strung high between poles, the faint breeze teasing the sequins of her costume. Each deliberate step sent a hush across the audience. Below, a fire eater tipped his head back and exhaled a column of blue flame that roared against the darkness. Horses, sleek and black as wood obsidian, circled the ring in perfect cadence, their hooves drumming a rhythm as precise as any drumline. The crowd gasped and cheered, voices rising like sparks. Ellie moved through the perimeter with a calm that belied the swirl of spectacle. She greeted a child here, steadied a startled mare there, her presence as steady as the lantern light. Yet her eyes never rested long. They swept the edges of the crowd, the alleys between wagons, the shifting silhouettes beyond the ring. She marked every stranger, the ranch hand with a brim pulled low, the drifter leaning against a post, the pair of men whose coats seemed too heavy for the mild night. Their eyes slid away when hers met them. The music swelled, but Ellie heard other sounds beneath it, the small, telling noises of a restless frontier evening. The scrape of boot soles on gravel, the clink of a spur half a beat too late. Her mind catalogued each note with the precision of someone long accustomed to danger. She caught herself measuring distance, from the center ring to the rifle concealed in her wagon, from the lantern tower to the shadowed alley. It was an old habit, one that had kept her alive in darker times. The smell of burning pitch pulled her backward through memory. Years ago, another night sky had stretched over a canyon choked with smoke. She saw herself younger, shoulders taut, lying prone on a ridge with a carbine snug against her cheek. A militia scout among hardened men, she had learned to read the land the way others read scripture. Her husband's voice echoed from that time, steady, warm, urging her to breathe between shots. He had fallen in a flash of musket fire not long after, his blood on her hands and the echo of her vengeance ringing through the cliffs. Even now, the memory tightened her chest like a hidden wound. A burst of applause yanked her back. The fire-eater bowed with a flourish, sparks dancing from his torch. The crowd's delight was genuine, but Ellie caught a different murmur beneath it, low, uneasy. She turned and saw them, 3 men standing just beyond the lantern's edge, their outlines smeared with shadow. Dust clung to their coats, and their faces, though partly hidden, were the hard creases of men who lived by the gun. One chewed on a matchstick, the other 2 shifted with restless energy, eyes never still. They were watching the ring, but their attention slid often toward the wagons where the circus kept its earnings. Ellie drifted closer without seeming to move at all. Their conversation, a faint rasp of gravel voices, reached her in pieces, words like take, easy, midnight. The smallest of the three noticed her glance and grinned, a flash of teeth in the dim. She held his gaze until his smile withered. Music rose again as the tightrope walker leapt into a graceful spin. Gasps swelled, children squealed with delight, and for a moment the night seemed to belong to wonder. Yet at the far edge of town a different sound broke the rhythm, a single sharp crack that split the desert air. It echoed across the sandstone cliffs, lingering like a challenge. A gunshot, distant, but unmistakable. The crowd faltered, cheers thinning to nervous whispers. Mothers drew children closer. Men reached instinctively for belts where pistols might hang. Ellie tilted her head, measuring the direction, the subtle delay of echo. Northridge, she thought, near the old freight road. The place the sheriff had warned of. She moved to the ring center, raising a hand to calm the performers. "Keep the show alive," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to reach the crew. "The night's not over." The acrobats nodded, masks of concentration hiding their alertness. Drums resumed, though a touch slower, more deliberate. Beyond the lantern glow the three strangers had vanished. Ellie's eyes searched the alleys between wagons, the deep shadows where canvas met stone. Nothing but the whisper of wind. Yet she felt them out there, like wolves circling unseen. A child tugged her sleeve, wide-eyed. "Was that a gun, miss?" Ellie crouched to meet the boy's gaze, her face softening. "Probably a hunter's mistake," she said, though her mind rejected the lie. "Stay close to your folks, all right?" He nodded and scampered back to his mother. Ellie rose and scanned the ridge again. A flicker of movement, perhaps only a branch swaying, caught her eye before it disappeared. She breathed in the dry night air, the scent of sage and smoke, and let her muscles remember what it meant to be ready. The band struck a brighter tune to chase away unease. Jugglers tossed flaming clubs that carved bright arcs against the sky. Laughter returned, but thinner now, like cloth stretched too tight. Above it all the stars burned cold and clear, indifferent to human worry. Ellie stepped back into the moving crowd, each sense sharpened to a fine edge. The past whispered to her in the rhythm of drums and the hiss of torches, in the memory of gunmetal and loss. Somewhere beyond those sandstone cliffs the Claiborne gang might already be raiding closer, drawn by the promise of easy spoils and the lure of midnight light. If they came, she would be ready. The circus was her stage, but the desert was her battleground, and she knew how to turn both to her advantage. The night shattered with the crack of rifles. One heartbeat the circus pulsed with music and torchlight, the next it drowned in chaos. Bullets punched through canvas, snapping ropes and splintering wooden poles. Lanterns swung wildly, throwing jagged shadows across the ring as horses screamed and reared, eyes rolling white in terror. Children shrieked, their cries tangled with the sudden thunder of hooves and gunfire. Out of the darkness thundered the Claiborne gang, a dozen riders hard and fast, their faces masked with scarves the color of dried blood. They fired as they came, revolvers spitting flame, the stench of black powder mixing with the sweet smoke of circus torches. The crowd broke apart like water struck by stone. Families bolted toward the edge of town, knocking over benches and baskets, the ground trembling beneath their stampede. Performers scattered between wagons, bright costumes flashing in the lantern glow before vanishing into shadow. Ellie moved before thought could catch her. She seized a young mother's arm, guiding her and her wide-eyed boy toward the low gate behind the animal pens. "Keep running," she urged, voice sharp as a whip crack. "Don't look back." She turned, caught a panicked horse by the bridle, and sent it galloping clear of the ring with a slap that stung her palm. Everywhere the air was alive with noise, steel against stone, terrified cries, the unrelenting roar of gunfire, but inside her, an old and icy calm spread like frost. A bullet tore through the canvas near her shoulder. She ducked, heart hammering, and sprinted for the main supply wagon. From its side she drew the long rifle she'd kept hidden beneath a layer of painted banners. Her fingers found a stock with the ease of long habit, muscle memory older than grief. She remembered another night of ambush, her husband falling as she squeezed the trigger too late, the crimson soaking into his shirt faster than she could staunch it. The memory flared and steadied her aim. But killing would come later. First she had to protect the living. She darted to the central mast where the high wire rigging met, a tangle of ropes and lantern pulleys she had planned like a battlefield. One swift tug released a line that set hidden lanterns flaring to life around the perimeter, blinding circles of sudden brilliance. The outlaws cursed as their eyes caught the glare. Horses skidded, startled by the flood of light and the shifting silhouettes that danced across the tents. The circus itself became her ally. Smoke from half-doused torches curled in thick veils, turning every beam into a phantom. Mirrors from the sideshow tents reflected the lanterns in disorienting flashes, multiplying her figure into a dozen ghostly shapes. From the ridge a rider fired blindly, the shot sparking against a steel stake. Ellie moved through the confusion like a shadow with purpose, her black coat blending into each pocket of darkness. A young acrobat stumbled from behind a wagon, blood streaking his sleeve. Ellie caught him before he fell. "Get to the east gate," she said, steadying him with a firm grip. "Tell the sheriff the Claibornes are here." He nodded, teeth clenched against pain, and disappeared into the smoky dark. The gang regrouped, angry shouts cutting through the din. Their leader, a towering brute with a scar down his cheek, bellowed orders. "Circle the wagons. Take the cash and burn the rest." His voice rang with arrogance, sure of victory. He didn't yet understand whose ground he'd chosen. Ellie's pulse slowed, every sense sharpening. She slid between tents, rifle snug against her shoulder, scanning for the weakest point in their formation. Two riders broke off toward the main ticket wagon where the night's earnings were locked. She exhaled, sighted, and fired. The first outlaw toppled from his saddle before the echo reached the cliffs. The second jerked in panic, his shot going wild, then wheeled his horse and fled toward the dark outskirts. Shouts of alarm rippled through the gang. They fired toward the flash of her muzzle, but she had already shifted, rolling behind a barrel, the canvas wall absorbing their bullets. Smoke thickened, heavy with the acrid tang of burned powder and singed roke. Somewhere behind her a horse screamed again, a high and terrible sound that sliced through the gunfire. Ellie's thoughts flickered to her lost husband, not to the moment of his death, but to the quiet evenings before it, when they'd sat side by side cleaning their rifles, trading soft jokes while the desert cooled. He had believed the frontier could be tamed with enough courage and law. She had learned instead that justice was a thing you carried inside, sharp as a hidden blade. Tonight, for him and for those she now called her own, she would wield it without hesitation. Another outlaw rushed the central ring, revolver raised. Ellie snapped her rifle to her shoulder and fired once, the shot precise and final. He spun backward, collapsing in a spray of dust and lantern light. Around him, his comrades faltered, their bravado fraying as the circus turned into a maze of light and shadow where death waited in silence. From the far side came a sudden flare, her knife thrower igniting a circle of oil to block the gang's retreat. Flames leapt skyward, casting monstrous shapes against the cliffs. The outlaws' horses panicked, bucking and rearing, eyes wild in the fiery glare. One rider tried to leap the blaze and fell hard, his scream swallowed by the roar of the fire. Ellie advanced through the smoke, every footstep sure. Her coat snapped in the wind, the silver of her hair catching stray sparks like threads of lightning. The leader saw her then, his eyes narrowing as he finally recognized that the ringmaster was more than a showwoman. He raised his pistol, but the shot never came. A lantern above him, its rope burned half through, dropped like a falling star and burst in a shower of light, sending his horse careening sideways. The gang broke. Some fled into the open desert, shadows swallowed by the night. Others threw down their weapons and raised empty hands, their courage gone with the smoke. Ellie lowered her rifle only when the last echo of hoofbeats faded beyond the hills. Around her the circus smoldered, tents torn and trampled, the scent of gunpowder thick as fog. Performers emerged from hiding, faces streaked with ash and fear but alive. Children cried softly against their mothers' skirts. Ellie felt the tremor in her own hands and let it pass through her like a cold wind. She had stood against death again and refused to yield. She walked to the center of the ring where the lanterns still burned bright, their flames steady despite the chaos. Looking out at the frightened but unbroken faces, she felt the old wound of loss ache like a scar beneath her heart. This time, she told herself, no one she loved would be taken. This time, the night belonged to her. Smoke swirled through the shattered circus like a living thing, curling around ropes and broken poles until the tents became shifting walls of mist. Lanterns guttered in the sudden gusts, their light catching fragments of mirrors and turning them into brief, blinding stars. The midnight circus no longer belonged to wonder or applause. It had become a labyrinth built for war. Ellie Kane moved through it like the architect of a dream, every sound and flicker feeding the plan she had imagined long before the first shot was fired. Music still pulsed from a battered calliope, a ghostly melody warped by cracked pipes. Its eerie notes echoed across the grounds, masking footsteps and whispers. From somewhere deep in the maze a knife flashed, a silver streak in the smoky dark. The circus knife thrower, face streaked with soot, stepped into the path of two advancing outlaws. He twirled his blades in dazzling arcs, the metal catching lantern light as he danced forward and back. Startled, the gunmen hesitated, their pistols wavering as the knives sliced the air inches from their faces. One lunged too quickly. The knife spun and buried itself in the wooden post beside his head with a crack like a rifle shot. The men fell back, cursing, their eyes darting for an easier target. A sudden thunder of hooves rolled from the far end of the encampment. The animal trainer flung open the gate of the holding pen, and the circus horses burst into the smoke with wild cries. Black and chestnut bodies surged through the narrow lanes, eyes flashing white, manes flying like banners. Tents ripped as the animals charged, scattering sparks of lantern light and kicking up a storm of dust that stung the outlaws' eyes. Men dove aside, their curses lost in the deafening rhythm of pounding hooves. Canvas walls billowed and collapsed, trapping some beneath folds of heavy cloth. Ellie used the chaos like a blade. She slipped between wagons, her long coat blending with the swirling gray. The rifle felt like an extension of her heartbeat, steady and sure. From a shadowed gap she sighted along the barrel and squeezed the trigger. The first outlaw fell without a sound, a neat hole blooming in the center of his chest. She shifted, fired again before the echo faded, and another man spun backward into the dust. The shots rang crisp and final, their precision unmistakable. A murmur rippled through the gang as those who remained caught a glimpse of her eyes through the smoke, pale gray, glinting like molten silver when the lantern light struck. "Silver-eyed widow," someone whispered, a name half legend on the frontier trails. The word spread like fire through dry grass. Fear followed close behind. Claiborne heard it too. From the far side of the ring his massive silhouette appeared, broad shoulders framed by a tattered canvas flap. His face was hard as carved stone, the scar down his cheek white against the soot. He studied the chaos with a predator's patience, noting the dead, the scattered, the terrified. When his gaze settled on Ellie, recognition flickered, a spark of wary respect that quickly hardened into challenge. He stepped forward, revolver drawn but low at his side. "So it's true," he called, his voice cutting through the din. "The widow they talk about in campfire lies. Thought you were just a story to scare greenhorns." Ellie moved a fraction to her left, never breaking eye contact. "You should have kept believing that." The calliope wheezed a final off-key note before falling silent. Smoke thickened, carrying the bitter tang of burned oil. Around them the last of the gang faltered, some retreating into the shadows, others firing wildly at phantoms that were only mirrors reflecting lantern light. Every misplaced shot only deepened their panic. Claiborne signaled two of his men forward with a flick of his hand. They advanced cautiously, trying to flank her. Ellie waited until they stepped into a shaft of lantern glow, then fired twice in seamless rhythm. Both dropped, their weapons clattering across the dirt. The echo cracked against the sandstone cliffs like distant thunder. Claiborne's jaw tightened, but he did not flinch. "You're fast," he said, his voice low now, almost a growl. "But you can't hold this ground forever." Ellie's answer was the click of a fresh round sliding into place. The sound was small, but in the charged silence it rang like a church bell. "I don't need forever," she replied. "Just long enough." The smoke parted briefly as a sudden gust swept through the tents, revealing the wreckage she had wrought. Outlaws sprawled in the dust, horses standing guard like dark sentinels, townsfolk creeping closer with newfound courage. Claiborne's remaining men looked to him for command and found only the grim set of his mouth. Their bravado crumbled beneath the weight of a legend made flesh. He took another step, slower this time, eyes narrowed. "You've got a score to settle," he said. "I can see it in you. Who'd we take from you, widow?" Ellie felt the old ache rise like a tide, the memory of her husband's blood on canyon stone, the echo of a shot too late. "A men worth 10 of you," she said, her voice a quiet blade. "Tonight I balance the ledger." The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of sage and gunpowder, the faint rustle of frightened townsfolk beyond the tents. Claiborne studied her a moment longer, something like doubt flickering across his scarred features. Then he raised his revolver higher, testing her resolve. Ellie's silver eyes did not waver. Every muscle remembered years of drill and loss, Every breath measured the space between survival and death. Around them the circus glowed with spectral light, smoke twisting like phantom performers, mirrors flashing stray fragments of moon. It felt less like a battleground than a stage set for the inevitable final act. Claiborne's men began to back away, sensing the shift, but their leader stood fast. He understood now that the woman before him was no mere ringmaster. She was the storm behind every frontier tale, the quiet hand of justice that struck when law failed. And as the lanterns hissed and the smoke swirled, he knew this night would carve her name into legend, whether he lived to tell it or not. A hush settled over Red Mesa as the moon began to darken. Shadows stretched long across the ruined circus grounds, the lanterns flickering like frail hearts in a dying wind. The desert sky, once scattered with stars, took on an eerie copper hue, as if the heavens themselves held their breath. When the last sliver of silver disappeared and the moon bled red, a low murmur rippled through those who had crept back to witness the night's reckoning. The world seemed caught between heartbeat and silence. Ellie Kane stepped into the center ring, her boots sinking slightly in the dust churned by stampeding horses. Smoke still curled from torn canvas, carrying the metallic scent of gunpowder and scorched rope. Posters flapped against leaning poles, their painted clowns and acrobats twitching like restless spirits. Across from her, framed by the crimson eclipse, Claiborne emerged from the shadows astride a restless black horse. He swung down, heavy boots striking the earth with a thud that echoed in the stillness. His gang lay scattered, some fled, some bound and sullen under the watch of townsfolk who had returned, emboldened by the sheriff's men. Only their leader remained free, a hulking figure with a coat of dark leather and a face cut by the pale slash of a long scar. His revolver gleamed at his hip, a promise of swift violence. The lanta light caught in his eyes, two shards of ice under the blood-red moon. Ellie's fingers hovered near the worn grip of her Colt. She could hear her own breathing, steady and deliberate, the way her husband once taught her on cold nights in canyon passes. She remembered his voice, always draw for justice, never for pride, that memory steadied her now, an old lesson sharpened by grief. She had lived too long with the weight of that night when bandits had taken him, and she'd arrived a heartbeat too late. Tonight there would be no hesitation. Claiborne's mouth twisted into a sneer. "So the stories are true," he said, his voice carrying in the charged silence. "The widow with silver eyes. I thought you'd be taller." Ellie answered only with a small, deliberate step forward, the hem of her coat brushing the dust. "You've terrorized these people long enough. It ends here." He laughed, low and cruel. "One woman against me. You think you're faster than death." "I know it," she said, her tone quiet as falling ash. The ring became a world unto itself, boundaries drawn by ruined tents and watching faces. A gust of wind lifted a stray poster into the air, the paper spiraling like a pale ghost between them before settling in the dust. Somewhere a child whimpered and was quickly hushed. The sheriff raised a hand to keep his deputies back. No one dared breathe too loudly. Claiborne rolled his shoulders, loosening his stance, the moon's crimson glow washing his scar in ominous light. "Then let's finish this." His hand twitched toward his revolver, fingers curling with lethal intent. Time stretched then. Ellie felt every grain of sand beneath her boots, every flutter of lantern flame, every slow beat of her heart. The world narrowed to the distance between them, a single breath of space. She saw the minute tightening of his jaw, the flick of muscle in his forearm, the signal before the strike. Their guns cleared leather almost as one. The desert erupted with the crack of gunfire. Sparks leapt from steel, echoing off the sandstone cliffs like thunder rolled into a single note. Lanterns swayed violently in the concussion, throwing wild shadows across the ring. Ellie's bullet found its mark first. Claiborne staggered, a look of stunned disbelief etched across his face as the revolver slipped from his grasp. He collapsed to one knee, breath rattling, the blood-red moon reflecting in his wide, fading eyes. A second later her second shot shattered the silence, knocking the weapon from his reach. The duel was finished before most could blink. For a heartbeat no one moved. Then the outlaws who remained, those captured and those who had crawled back from their panic, lowered their heads and raised empty hands. The sheriff's deputies surged forward, binding wrists, disarming the defeated. The crowd exhaled in a single, trembling sigh, a sound of fear draining into all. Ellie lowered her Colt and let the stillness settle into her bones. Smoke drifted in lazy ribbons around her, catching the moon's crimson light until it glowed like living fire. Claiborne lay on his back, staring at the sky as if trying to bargain with it. She stepped closer, boots crunching in the brittle sand. His lips parted, a whisper of something, curse or plea, but no words came. His chest rose once, then stilled. The sheriff approached slowly, hat in hand. "It's done," he said, his voice hushed with respect. "You saved this town." Ellie gave a single nod, eyes never leaving the fallen outlaw. "Justice saved it," she murmured, and holstered her weapon. Around them, lanterns swayed and the eclipse deepened, the moon a perfect sphere of blood against a black sky. The performers of the midnight circus gathered silently at the edge of the ring, faces pale but proud. Children peered from behind their parents, their wide eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Somewhere a horse stamped softly, the only sound in a world holding its breath. Ellie looked to the horizon where dawn would come, though not for hours yet. She felt the old grief loosen its hold, the memory of her husband settling like a gentle hand on her shoulder. Tonight she had kept her vow, no more lives lost to lawless men. The desert wind stirred her hair and carried away the acrid scent of gunpowder, leaving only the cold perfume of sage and sand. When the sheriff turned to give orders, Ellie stepped back into the ring's center. The lanterns cast her shadow tall against the tattered canvas, a figure cut from legend. The people of Red Mesa watched in silence, their whispers already weaving the story into something larger than life, the widow who faced a gang beneath a blood-red moon and proved swifter than death. As the last trace of the eclipse began to fade and silver light edged the horizon, Ellie holstered her gun and walked toward her waiting troop. The night was not yet over, but the reign of the Claiborne gang was finished, and the name Eleanor Kane would ride the wind across the frontier, carried in awe and gratitude, a tale to outlast the desert stars.